Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for everybody coming out. I'm going to get into it pretty quickly because we don't have a lot of time. It's a lightning quick session. Okay, so I want to talk about Lightning specifically for Backend and Apex developers. So hopefully that defines you in some way, shape, or form. And I wanted to start off by talking about what the genesis for this talk was and why I wanted to present to this audience specifically. So at the start of this summer, my organization had a really compelling and really high priority use case for why we needed a custom application and a fairly robust custom application. We needed to have user registration and login. We needed to have a personalized learning path. We had multiple personas. We had a time-based flow. And we didn't have a lot of time. It was a fantastic opportunity, but it was aimed at middle schools, and we needed to be able to launch before the start of the school year. So this was the beginning of summer. We needed to launch it by the end of the summer. And that's where Lightning comes in. Because we are a small development team, like teeny tiny, and there was absolutely no way we could build this thing from start to finish in that short time period. We also didn't have enough time to hire or to bring in consultants for that kind of thing. We were actually building out what the program was as we were building the application. So not like well-formed requirements that I'm sure you all have whenever you start a project, right? We didn't have any of that, but we had been looking at what Lightning had to offer. And we had been looking at communities, and especially the user management piece that communities offer. And we thought, why not? Let's go for it. This could really be the answer to our problems, and we have the skill set in-house to be able to build something. And we did. In 3 months, we built a public-facing, single-page application. It was about 60 custom components. It's hosted on Salesforce communities, and we had over 3,500 registered users in the first month after launch. And I don't know how those numbers sound to you, but for us, that was huge. It was great in terms of what our timeline was, and it was great in terms of the audience we were trying to reach, and it's something that we can continue to build on. So it was a really, really big win for us. And going into it, I don't have a lot of front-end experience. I had very little JavaScript, and I was worried because, do we have the skill set to be able to do this? Is Lightning going to give us enough support that we can actually build this thing and have it look good? Because it needed to be a good product. And it really did. And it let us build really, really quickly. So that's why I think it's compelling, and that's what I want to talk about. So front end, back end, full stack. I know a lot of Salesforce developers really are full stack. They do custom UI work. They do Visualforce. They do the whole thing, soup to nuts. That's not me. I like the back end. I like building APIs. I like doing the business logic layer. All of that is really interesting and compelling to me. And when HTML and CSS start to creep in, it's not really my thing. I don't like it. But Lightning development wraps up a lot of those front-end tools. And that's what really converted me, because I was able to, as a back-end developer, go from an idea or a proof of concept, and I could build it completely myself. I didn't need to have meetings. I didn't need to get the front-end styling guy. I didn't need to have a big production just to get something in front of a PM or in front of an internal customer and see if this is what we wanted. Because we were moving so fast, and because we were, defining as we were building, we could iterate quickly. I could say, okay, let me just go mark that up. We built our wireframes by looking at the Salesforce Lightning design system. It was, having that really quick feedback loop was really, really important. If you are thinking about becoming more full stack, this is a great entry point, because you're going to have good support, you're going to have good frameworks to work with, and that's awesome. But it doesn't mean you have to become a front-end developer. I'm still not a front-end developer. I didn't want to be. But the JavaScript stuff was really fun, and being able to plug in those frameworks. And if I can build something that looks good, like anybody can build something that looks good, because that is not my special skill. It also, and I want to talk about the value add, it made my value add as a developer so much bigger. I became more valuable to my organization. And if you're not thinking about what your value add is as a developer, you should be, because I can guarantee it's not building custom CSS and HTML for a spinner or for a date picker. That's not what makes you valuable. But if you can grab a Lightning-based component and dump it into an application that you're building and show it to somebody minutes later, that's value add, and that's really, really powerful for a developer. Okay, so I want to get into a little bit more of the soup to nuts. So if you're just starting out with Lightning development, you've been at Dreamforce for 2 days, there are words flying around all over the place. Everything has to do with Lightning all the time. And I hope you like cheesy PowerPoint illustrations because you're about to get some. It's a word salad, and it starts to get like numbing of the amount of words that are being thrown at you. There's Aura, there's the Lightning component framework, you've got Lightning-based components, a Salesforce Lightning design system, that one's super important. We've got event-driven programming as one of the big concepts that you're hearing a lot about. There's Lightning, whoa! This is maybe a little too out the gun. Okay, so tons of concepts floating around. It's really hard to separate it out and keep it straight. Obviously, I can't even keep my PowerPoint straight. But what I want to do is just walk through each of these and unpack them a little bit. And what really helped me was looking at these concepts and frameworks in relationship to each other, so you kind of know what you're actually building with. So that's what we're going to do in the next, 13 minutes. Let's see if I can do it. High-level architecture. So we still have our front-end and back-end divide. And on the server side, we've got our server-side controller. It's going to make calls to Apex. We know it and we love it. But now we also have this client-side controller. And the client-side controller is not just handling view state and some, pretty pictures and that kind of thing. There is real business logic happening in that controller. And in fact, that's where most of it should be happening. When you're building a Lightning application, you're trying to minimize trips to the server. You're trying to get it to be responsive and fast, and that's why these Lightning components and apps look so good, is because everything is loaded on the client side, and it can be very, very speedy. So to me, this is why Lightning development is really compelling for back-end developers, is you need to be able to manage what's being handled where. You need to be thinking about the patterns that you want so that the application is speedy, and how much can I have on this front end. And there's a lot of resources that Lightning bubbles up for you. There's a shared cache that you can plug into super easily. But it is a little bit of a mind shift of going from, okay, I know how to handle all these things in an Apex controller and bubble up to an API. It's fundamentally different. And so getting comfortable with what those patterns look like, and there's lots of great sample code out there, is super important. There's also the view markup part, which is where I start to get a little like, but it's wrapped up really nicely. Like, you're going to be able to grab base components that look and feel like Lightning right out of the box. And if I can do it, you can do it, because it's definitely not my strong suit. Okay, so that's the high level. Let's talk about what a component actually is, or what a component bundle is. So if you've gone in and you started to build a Lightning component, or you've just gone in and tried to create one, you've seen that there's a lot of files available, and it can look like a big stack. But the important thing here is you don't need all of those for every component by any means. There's just a few you're going to go to over and over again, and in some cases you're just going to need one. So I'm just going to talk through these pretty quickly. First off, we have the .cmp file. So that's our markup. That's what's actually going to render the view for our user. This is the one that you're always going to have. We talked a little bit about the controller a minute ago. So we've got two files here. We've got the controller, and we've also got the helper file. And that's going to allow you to have well-formed code. You're going to be able to have some helper functions and split things out and keep things nice, but they're both handling that controller piece. We've got our .css for some custom styling if you need it. If you're doing a lot of base Lightning components and the look and feel is what you want, you may not need .css files for all your custom components, or even most of them. Just depends on if you're trying to do something a little extra, a little fancier, if you need a different look and feel. Last one I wanted to call out especially is the design file. So we're all Salesforce developers. We're all used to trying to build things that are extensible and also that can be adapted and changed with as little code as possible. So the .design allows you to bubble up attributes or variables, you can think of it, that an admin or a declarative developer can set later when they're using your component. So if you have something that's going to work for multiple personas, but you just want to be able to say, like, well, maybe this is for our national user and this is for our state user, but I don't want to build two components for that. You can build one component, take that state variable, bubble it up, and then when an admin is using your component, they can set it themselves. You build it once, and it can be used in a lot of different places. And that's what's really fun about component-based development, is that these things are contained and reusable. And I think that becomes really clear in the next slide. Quickly, I'll just touch on there's, OraDoc for documentation, renderer if you do want to get fancy with your rendering, that's there for you. And then the .svg, so you can have a pretty icon that will let people know what they're going to be pulling out of the Lightning App Builder. Okay, that is what is in a component bundle. Let's talk about kind of where it is. I led into this a little bit. And I'm going to use an example of an expenses component. Really basic. You'll build one of these in Trailheads when you go through the basic Lightning path. So if you build an expenses component, let's say you built it for a custom app. You built an HR app. It needed a place where employees could go in, log their expenses. We all love to do that. We all have to do that very soon when we get back from Dreamforce. And you just built it once. But that's a really handy little component that you might want in a lot of places. So now that we have this expenses component, and it's self-contained, and it's reusable, and you gave it a nice, pretty icon, an admin can say, hey, you know what? I want that on the home page. I'm just going to grab it and I'm going to drop it on there. Done. Now we have an expenses tracking component within Lightning Experience on the home page. Maybe you create a community for your employees. That's also a great place to have it. Boom, you can just drag it over, drop it. You built it once, you get to use it all across the platform. And if you use the design attributes so that you could customize it and maybe give it a slightly different flavor, maybe you have external users who are going to need a slightly different look and feel to the expenses component, you set those attributes. Now you can actually have that one expenses component that you put one time, 3 different places, and that works in 3 different ways, all without having to touch the code again. And we did that a lot. Many of the components in our app are reused extensively in different views. It may not even be recognizable as the same component, but we just had to build it one time. And it's awesome. Okay, so frameworks and libraries. This is where I think some of the confusion comes from because there's a lot of these things. So I'm just going to run through them one by one. So we have Aura. We've heard a lot about Aura. This is the open source UI framework from Salesforce. This is what all of this is built on. And it's everything flows from Lightning. We also have its sort of companion, SLDS. This is the CSS framework. Again, open source, has all the beautiful styling that makes things look like that Lightning experience. And then we have the Lightning framework. So now we're away from open source, and now we're in the force.com world. So this is what's going to wrap up all of the Lightning functionality. This is handling the component files' relationships to each other, all of the event patterns, the relationship between the backend and the front end. This is managing all of that, and it's built on top of the Aura and SLDS frameworks. Even on top of that, we have base Lightning components. Now, this is almost more of a library, and these are going to be the little bits of functionality that are completely wrapped up. So one line, maybe a few attributes to set, and you have a date picker, and you have a spinner, and they're already styled in SLDS. They could not be more user-friendly. And I'm just going to layer in some of the markup here because I think sometimes seeing a lot of these tags, it's hard to see which thing is which. You see Aura all over the place. That just tells you we're in the Aura framework. We know that. You're going to see the SLDS. And then you're going to see the UI colon and the Lightning colon. So the UI colon tells you you're using the Lightning framework. When you see that Lightning colon, you know you're using a base Lightning component. Now, you may have noticed that there's 2 email input fields here. And that also gets a little weird. It's like, okay, so there's 2 of these. Which one do I need and why? And the answer is, as usual, it depends. So here are those same frameworks arranged a little bit differently. And I've given 2 axes here. I've given control one way and then difficulty and time to implement. And this is a familiar trade-off for anybody who's been developing for any length of time. So all the way at the bottom, we have our base Lightning components. You're going to have the least amount of control because they're already built. They are fully formed. You may have a few values that you can set differently to give it, a field that's required or something's disabled, but it's pretty much baked. You don't have a lot of control, but it's super easy. You drop it onto the page and you're done. You move up a little bit from that, and we've got the Lightning framework. So these things are pretty wrapped up. There's a little bit more functionality, but they're also really easy to use. You can maybe get a little bit more fancy and a little bit more custom, but essentially, it does what it does. You move up from there, and now we're just using the SLDS framework. So if I need something, there's not a Lightning framework piece for that for me. There's not a base Lightning component. I need to build it myself, but I want it to look like Lightning experience. I can use SLDS, get that styling, but it's more work. It's going to take more time because I have to build it. I put Aura on this slide because I think it helps to see it in relationship to the other things, but it's grayed out because you're never going to be directly calling Aura functions. All of the Aura functionality that you're going to be using is wrapped up inside of the Lightning framework. That's handled for you. But that kind of gives you an idea of where that lives. And then all the way at the top, we have no framework. So pure JavaScript, HTML, CSS, totally custom. You can do whatever you want, but definitely more work. I think that's probably a pretty familiar pattern for most of you. I threw in a slide here at the last minute because I'd gotten some feedback that it's hard to visualize like even what is a base Lightning component. So there's those little markup tags where you're just really grabbing that thing out of the library, that Lightning input, setting some variables along the lines of, is this disabled, is it required, and then it's going to render what you see up there on that screen, something that's nice, it's pretty, it's already styled. And if you're not sure, again, which ones to go with, get yourself a sample app, just an empty container, start throwing those things in there, and then you can compare apples to apples and figure out what works best for your use case. Okay, event-driven architecture. This is another one of those things we're hearing a lot about. And it's really about the communication of our applications overall. So what are the patterns? We talked a little bit about the fact that components are self-contained and reusable. They're encapsulated, which means they know what's inside of themselves, but they don't know where they're living. We built that expenses component. That might be in the Lightning user experience. That might be in a community. The important thing is that it doesn't need to know where it is. It already has everything that it needs, but it still needs to be able to communicate to other components and to other applications. So there's a few different ways that this can work. When we have a parent component or app that needs to communicate down to its children, we have options because it's all encapsulated together. That parent can communicate down to its children in a few ways. It can set values directly. So the attributes on a component can be directly set by its parent. Easy peasy. It can also, if I get my PowerPoint working, it can also call methods on the component. So this is a really fun feature and one to look into, especially for us backend folks. Components can have their own APIs. You can expose methods that can be called by other components and by the parent component and start to build things that are really rich using that pattern. So that's a super fun one that I've just started to play with. But then a lot of the time you'll be firing events. So parent components can still communicate down to their children components through events. Now, it goes a little bit different when we're talking about communicating up the hierarchy, because a child component needs to be independent of its parent. It doesn't know where it lives. So virtually all of the time, you're going to be firing off events. That's the only way that a child component is really going to be able to communicate up to its parent or out to a sibling. And just to dig into that a little bit further in terms of like, what are we actually, I'm going to go too far. What is an event? So it's very simple. It's a publish-subscribe model, essentially, at the end of the day, or a broadcast, you can think of it. So we have here component A, it's firing an event. So what that means is it has this Aura register event, so it's defined what particular event it's going to fire. You've defined what that event looks like. Maybe you've defined it so that it has some data packed into it. So an event can have attributes. That way, when it fires off the event, it can pack in some data, send it out into the world, and then the other components and apps that are subscribed to that event are going to be able to grab that and work with it. You can see that component's firing out that event. Component B and C both have a handler. So that Aura handler is where it says, okay, I need to listen for this event. This is the type of event I'm going to listen for. And when I hear that event, I'm going to call some function on my controller, unpack that data, and go do what I need to do. If you have a component that doesn't have a handler, nothing happens. It's not going to hear the event. This is a one-way communication. It's a broadcast and subscribe. So there's not going to be any return information. Running out of time. So really quickly, Lightning Data Service. I wanted to talk about this because when you're looking for things that will help you build an application quickly, this one is it. This one lets you move so fast. So Lightning Data Service allows you from within your markup and within the client-side controller to interact with, at the moment, singular S objects. So you can have a record. You can load it in the view state without any controllers. You can do updates and you can do inserts solely through your client-side controller. You don't have to have any back-end controller to handle basic CRUD operations. The Lightning Data Service is also managing a shared cache. So if you have multiple components on the page that are all dealing with the same record and you make an update, it's going to instantly update out to all of those components with no work from you. It's really slick. Know it, love it, use it. Can't recommend it more. You might remember this HighLevel Architecture. You can kind of think of Lightning Data Service as a thing that connects your front end to the back end without much work from you at all, like eliminates a whole big step. So that was a lot of concepts, but hopefully we've gone from word salad into a little bit more sense. So we've got our frameworks. We've got our Lightning framework, which is all of that functionality from Aura wrapped up and for you on the Force.com platform. We've got the Salesforce Lightning Design System and Aura on which it's all built. And then we've got our tools and patterns, those base Lightning components, those Lightning Data Service, and event-driven programming. If you didn't favorite this session, go ahead and do it, because I'll post this into the chatter, and then you'll get this PowerPoint at the end. So feel free to do that. And with that, I'm out of time. But if anybody has any questions or wants to talk more about the application we built, I'd love to talk to you about it. Thank you.